All right, welcome back to the Iron Shepherds podcast. We're here today with Rich McMahon, CEO of CDA Ventures. Rich, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me today.
Good. Yeah, let's just jump right into it. Tell us about what CDA is, what you do, how you make money.
So, CDA Ventures is a consulting business that we focus on helping retailers, consumer brands, and wholesalers with everything from strategy to operational improvements to digital and AI transformations. We work in both a fractional basis, so fractional COO, fractional chief strategy officer, fractional CTO, fractional supply chain officer, et cetera, and or project based. We have a number of clients that prefer to do scope based projects, and we work with them on that. And we work across the spectrum. We're really trying to help companies in this day and age with growth and opportunities to really improve their businesses.
Yeah, great. So how do you go about meeting people you want to work with? I imagine with the number of years you've been in the business, you probably get a lot of referrals, but you do a lot of cold outreach as well.
We do. The reality is, so I've been running CDA Ventures for about 10 years now. And, I would say in the earlier days, I was also doing a bit of angel and venture investing, through the business with early stage startups. Your referrals through your network fade after a little while after leaving an executive role, right? People love you when you're in the role, and then when you're gone, they fade pretty quickly. And so you have to work on developing a network, getting out there, engaging with people, and then prospecting. And so, we get business through a variety of referrals through people within the network. I'm an advisor for, a dozen or so software companies. And so through that, I also get a lot of engagement with customers and potential customers where one thing leads to another. And sometimes we're able to help them out.
So do you kind of work like I'm just trying to think of the various partners I worked with in the past. Like say when a Deloitte would come in, when I was at Oracle, for instance, Deloitte would be engaged with say a Skechers, and but they'd say, hey, we're not really going to do any of the actual work here. We'll contract out to somebody else who's going to handle the integrations and the implementation and stuff like that, but we're going to handle the project, the change management, that sort of thing. Is that kind of what CDA does?
Well, we would do all of it. So it really depends on the opportunity. We have clients that would bring us in instead of a Deloitte and say, listen, we want someone who's kind of been there and done that as an operator, right? The benefit I bring to the table is having 17 years at Bed Bath & Beyond. I had, 5+ years, as a partner at KPMG in their retail and consumer markets, consulting practice. I spent, another 5+ years, on a global CPG, really working on large scale transformational projects. So in some cases, companies will say, hey, Rich, we're not really sure. We're at point A. We want to get to point Z. We're not really sure how to get there. And we'll do everything from creating the strategy, helping them communicate their vision, effectively, all the way through to then, okay, well, what are the executable tactical projects that have to get done in order to live on the promise of your vision. And so in those cases, we will bring in people and we will, staff projects that will be the hands-on doers in there. A good example, we had a client that we did work with that, scaled their business quickly. They scaled beyond their capabilities from a supply chain perspective. They had someone do some strategy work for them, but then they faded away and they said, hey, we now have a strategy. We don't know how to execute on this. And so we brought in supply chain experts, transportation experts. We brought in industrial engineers. We designed, their facility. We laid it out, soup to nuts for them on how to get their building up and operational, as well as then working with the technology partners towards, in that case, it was a re-implementation of an existing platform. In some cases, we will recommend new platforms, and then we will either help or partner with others to help in the implementation of that, depending upon what's in the best interest of our client.
Gotcha. So when somebody comes to you and you say, hey, we're trying to get from point A to point Z, is an example of that, and I'm just going to pull numbers out. Just we're at 3.5 billion now, and we want to be at, we want to be at 10 billion in 10 years, and you're breaking down the number. There may be various things there, or is it really more like we don't have enough square footage in our warehouse to do what we need to do? What are some ideas to optimize that?
Again, I would say it depends.
Yeah,
In
sure.
Some cases, I have a client that will say, hey, listen, we're a $600 million wholesale business. We're trying to become $1 billion operator in this space. Here's kind of the core components of our business. We have ideas and thoughts around what we want to do, but we don't have it in a coherent structure with a clear message that we can put out to our organization. The business may be able to articulate it that succinctly or not. They may be more broad and hey, we're thinking of X, Y, and Z. And in those cases, I'd come in and help them kind of map it out. It's the same thing I did taking Bed Bath Beyond X from roughly $1 billion to about $12 billion in revenue. We did the same thing. We'd say, okay, well, what are our overarching themes? What are the key messages within those themes? And then how do we go out and work across the organization to define what are the specific things that we need to do to get us where we want to get to? And so it can be, from that strategy level all the way through, or in some cases it might be a little bit more detailed. Hey, we've narrowed down within our broad strategy. We want to undertake efforts around artificial intelligence. However, we're not really sure what to do. There's so much going on in the space of AI. There's so much being pressed in the media. Our heads are spinning. How do we make a coherent view strategically about what we want to do from an AI perspective? And then that oftentimes leads to then, okay, can CDA Ventures help us take what you've helped us define into now executable programs? And again, in some cases, those are things that we staff and we deliver for the client. And in some cases, we do in partnership with other software vendors or other providers.
So yeah, that's really interesting. How have the conversations changed over the last 12 to 18 months? And I would say my perception kind of coming from that Oracle world and then from an AI company, um, it seems like we went from operational improvements, let's look at the different SaaS packages and all this stuff, to all of a sudden the buzz at NRF was, hey, I I'm supposed to be putting AI into our company. I have no idea how to do it. How has that changed for you?
Yeah, I think that's astute, right? That's an astute perspective on how times have evolved. I think companies are really faced with, and I saw this coming in 2023 was a great year for us. We were expanding quickly, and as we got into 2024, again, you had broad macroeconomic global wars, tariffs, coming into late 24, 25. And so I think the landscape for retailers and consumer brands and wholesalers changed a bit, and their ability to define what they were looking for and then pull the trigger and execute on it started to elongate. So what might have been conversations that would take 1 month to 3 months started taking 3 to 6 months.
Mhm.
Companies were start and stop. Hey, we're ready to go. I'm going to ghost you for the next 2 months and then pick back up because now the bright, shiny object that popped up is no longer there. And AI has become that, right? It's all over the news. It's all over, the stock market. So it's unavoidable. And so companies are being pressed by their boards and by C-level leadership. What are we doing? If you're in a C-level role, your board's going to be asking you, hey, what are we doing from an AI perspective? And if you say, I don't know, or I don't have a vision, or I don't really know where, that's not a good look, right? And
Right.
so I think companies are being pressed to say, what are you doing from that? What I think I see as we are into late 25 and now moving into 26, I think things in that space are seeing some level of stabilization where they're starting to be a little bit more of a realistic perspective. It's still a little bit of a bright, shiny object, but I think companies are now starting to say, okay, let's take a deep breath. What are our strategies? And in defining your strategies, I think companies have to start with what's my existing tech stack, right? And if I look at my existing tech stack, who's doing what within AI?
Mhm.
Am I leveraging what they offer from an AI perspective today? Right. And Some companies are getting ahead of the game by they're building out an AI focused team, whether they do it at a C level, or which some are, or they do it within a structure of saying, let's define a team to really go out and look at innovation within AI. And that could be, looking at the way AI has evolved from AI to generative AI to agentic AI. And what does that really mean? Should we be out there now hiring, in essence, prompt engineers to go out and start building agents to do
Hmm.
work for us, and to optimize our performance, and how can we leverage that? Or are there solutions that are now starting to come to bear in the market that we can leverage, right? The AI stuff, in 24 was much more weighted around things like customer service. Right.
Hmm.
That was the easy gain, which is, hey, and I sat on the board of and I was an advisor for a company called Timely that, that's what they were trying to do. They said, hey, listen, we're leveraging AI not just to automate your call center capabilities, but we're hyper contextualizing this information for you by integrating with all your back end systems so that instead of answering 20% of your call centers through AI, we can do 50, 60, 70, 80%,
Hmm.
of those things. And so, but those were the easy, quick wins. Now I think we're evolving where people are starting to say within the retail and consumer space, hey, how can we leverage this for inventory? How can we leverage this for other aspects? I am an advisor with a company called Glancy 3D. We focus on CPG, and package design. Oftentimes, consumer products companies, they just pass the baton on package design to a third-party agency. Now
Right.
AI and a platform like Glancy 3D can provide them a capability to do some of that in-house. They can get heat maps and determine how effective is my packaging from how customers look at it with their eyeballs. And then how can I tweak that packaging to see different variations of it? And then maybe work with an agency where now I've gotten us down the field a bit, and now they can really take it, to the next level and punch it across the goal line.
Right. Right. Yeah. And with CPG, it's so interesting because, sometimes it's not only what the packaging looks like or the heat map, but it's like, well, we've got to stack 22 cases on top of each other. And this looks really cool, but it's going to collapse under the weight of what's on there.
That 100%. Or a good, thing that I like Glancy for as well is, right, if you thought about, okay, how does my package compare when it's on the shelf in
Correct.
a retail environment with other brands? And having the ability to kind of heat map that environment and say, okay, if a customer is walking by this fixture and they're looking at a 4-foot fixture, does my product pop or does someone
Right.
else's product? Now, a lot of that has to do also, where are you on the shelf? Are you top shelf, mid shelf, et cetera? But there's a lot to do with the visual design of packaging. And again, it's another example of where I think companies are now starting to find that there are what I'll define kind of point-based solutions that are starting to solve pain points for their business and deliver real results, right? Which is critical from a retailer, consumer, wholesale perspective. It has to deliver real results. And then I think if you can start to see the results of that, then you're going to see the next evolution. I think what will be interesting is, and I think about software over the years of having been a CIO and then become chief strategy officer and remained with oversight over technology, is really how the evolution will go. I think you're going to start finding point solutions that solve problems, and then eventually they'll be in an ecosystem, and then you'll start seeing broader enterprise type of capabilities that get embedded, into existing platforms, because that's how it has to evolve, right? The age old
Right.
question of do you buy best of breed, or you buy kind of a, all in one package? And sometimes it's a combination. I think we're going to continue to see evolution within AI, as brands, like you said, Oracle or an SAP or whomever, goes
Right.
out and start to say, how do I build these capabilities into my platform to deliver real results that are meaningful for my client?
Right. So, back to retail, now it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you'll agree with me. I always found that among industries, retailers were some of the slowest to adopt um, technologies. And, in fact, I could think back to my career, several people I would try to sell into were still and are still today using AS400 green screen applications and doing everything manually and trying to sell them on something that uses even not even AI but just sort of algorithms, let's say, to do planning or replenishment, and sitting there with the buyer, or not a buyer, but like a planner, distributor, and having to say, well, I got to see the math. How did it come up with telling me that I should be two units of this over in Topanga Canyon? And are you still coming across that with the
Sure.
retailers, or are they starting to, like you said earlier before we were on, guys like you and me are starting to age out a little bit. So is the younger group coming in and going, no, we don't care about the math. We're going to trust the machinery.
I think that there's a combination of it. I think that the AI, I think that the factors of the impact of e-commerce, right? I'll call it broadly the Amazon Warby Parker effect of, e-commerce and the ability of Zappos, changing that whole model. And I think AI is doing that again. But and it's interesting, again, having been a partner at KPMG in their consulting practice before I went to Bed Bath, I had a philosophy and an approach about bringing in new capabilities. And so when I got to Bed Bath, I also learned the other side of that, which is, you don't always need to chase the bright, shiny object, right? We had an old, version of JDA, if you remember JDA software,
Sure. Of course.
that ran on an AS400. And quite frankly, we were able to build point solutions around that to deliver real value. So when you
Right.
talk about like merchandise financial planning or forecasting, we brought in external solutions for that. And yes, you had to educate. I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of SaaS vendors still have is that they're oftentimes, and again, it's the breakdown awful of sales to the implementation. They're so quick to want to sell it and say how great it is that they forget sometimes to really understand where the retailer is.
Mm.
What's the current stack for the retailer? What are the challenges and the pain points for that retailer? And how do I help deliver measurable KPIs and ROI for that retailer with the solution I'm delivering? And a good portion of that in the implementation of that, and why I think a lot of implementations sometimes struggle is they don't understand that enough to position their product correctly. And then they don't in the implementation prioritize or pull the retailer into the reality that you have to properly train your people. You have to
Mm.
educate them. So in a forecasting, when we implemented forecasting years ago at Bed Bath, right, sure, our buyers were very suspect. Our chief merchant was hugely suspect of technology. And quite frankly, culturally, we were very cautious because, and at Bed Bath it was a very unique decentralized ordering model where we only ordered 30% of our merchandise. Basically, if you looked at the total receipts, only 30% were ordered centrally, 70% was replenished at the store level. Now, really what that was is the buyers set up kind of an assortment, and then they worked with the field. And then once they created the assortment, then the field was the one that understood what was happening at the local level. So we were very cautious that we didn't want the field to think that, oh my God, they're so much smarter at corporate. I don't have to think about this anymore. We wanted that ownership. So I think that for SaaS companies who are trying to work with retailers, you have to try to understand the retail environment. I spoke a while ago. I had a salesperson from IBM, Angela Messer, who, when she first started working with me at Bed Bath in my early days, she drove me bananas. But she really understood our business. She would walk the halls and talk and understand. And then she would match solutions to really where our pain points were. And it's a differentiator. And I think too often salespeople are so quick and using AI and other capabilities, just go out and prospect. They're just randomly. I get pinged 20 times a day with some ridiculous pitch that it's clear that they've done zero research and understanding what my business is. They're pitching me things because I work in the retail space that is for a retailer. It's not for my business.
Right.
So that's where I think things are evolving. I think companies, SaaS companies, technology companies, consulting companies, we have to do a better job of understanding where retailers are. We have to understand, yes, some of them are going to be hesitant, and you've got to bring them along in that process.
Right. Well, I think, and I'm not trying to defend any of the people who are not taking their time to research you, but I think we're seeing a lot of the SaaS companies really cut headcount and putting it on the salesperson to try to prospect at scale even harder, and people run out of out of things, out of ways to do it, right? So they're doing a bit of fire and forget. It's not going to ever earn your business. It's not going to ever get you to respond to them. But I think that's a lot of what we're seeing.
I agree. Listen, I would say, listen, we have that conversation often about retail, right? There are times that I'll walk stores and I'll see and have an experience within a retail store, and I may comment on that concept. Hey, the aisles were not clean or the shelves were empty, whatever. And there's a lot of pushback that you get, which is rightfully so. That people will say, "Oh, you're blaming the frontline workers." Right. And they're
Mhm.
understaffed. And that is true. Right. There are across the board, right? Companies are trying to scale things back. It's a tougher market. We're all working off of thin margins. And so oftentimes that's where things suffer. Uh, I always try to tell people that's true, but it still doesn't make it right. Right? If I walk into a retail store and the shelves are empty for whatever the reason is, as a customer, that's a bad experience. And
Yeah.
so I say the same thing for software, right? And again, I advise with, a dozen or so software companies, right? We have to try to understand the complexities and the pain points associated with this retail's business. And then we have to figure out, does our solution deliver value to them? And if so, how do we articulate that in the correct way and not oversell it and position it so that we can have success and we can be their success in that process?
Right. Right. So pivoting just a little bit, and you talked about looking outside at your customers or your prospects, and how can you help them be more efficient and so forth. To what extent have you put the mirror in front of yourself and said, well, gosh, there's a lot going on with AI out there. There's a lot going out with certain tools. How do we modernize to do that? Has that been an approach for you as well?
Sure. I have calls frequently with companies that are building capabilities within that. If I look at it just from a sales perspective, right? How do you automate that process, right? If I'm thinking about, I could go out and I could compile lists of target companies based on, hey, they're in the retail space, they fit a particular size and structure that I think makes, but then I have to go out and look for signals, right? Because I
Mhm.
could I could get a list and I could cold call all of them, or I could cold email all of them, and I could just play a numbers game and say, okay, I'm going to flood 1,000 messages out there and hope that I get X percent, conversion on, or X percent, follow up, and then but I try to go through the effort of saying, okay, what are the likely signals associated with when someone would benefit from partnering with me? That could be organizational changes, that could be announcement of strategic initiatives, that could be announcement of struggles with margins or inventory, et cetera. And I look for those signals, and then I try to look across the spectrum of what I do and who I partner with and say, okay, is there something within my arsenal that would make sense for this company? And if so, then after having developed a relationship, right, I try not to go in and start with a sales pitch. I try to go in and start with a relationship side. If I've done my job of trying to create a relationship on a personal level, then when I come in and say, hey, I think this solution might be of value to you, hopefully then that resonates. I've had calls recently where we did just that. Someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, let's connect." We created a bit of a personal connection, and then we said, "Hey, I've got one of these companies within what I'm doing. I think might be a fit. It's a revenue generating solution that I think can help your business. If you think that makes sense, great.
Right.
Let's further the conversation. And if they don't, that's okay as well, right? My job is to try to see where things make sense and hopefully can connect the dots more often than not in order to generate, value for all of us.
Right. So without giving up any of your secrets, I don't want to put your competitors onto this, but the genesis of this question was, so let's say I ran a sales team at Oracle that was 8 sales reps, and they had, let's say on average, 20 to 30 accounts each. And we would go through the practice of, all right, well, make sure you set up Google alerts on PepsiCo, and those sorts of things, kind of trying to, like you said, look for the signals and things along those lines. That could leave a seller sitting in front of their desk reading new Google alerts, all day, every day and not actually getting into the selling. Have you been able to make that more efficient? Because I imagine your target size is hundreds, if not thousands of companies, right?
Sure. Yes. I have found some solutions that help automate some of that. Uh, but I'll answer it, I guess, in two respects, right? So in your example there, if I have 20 to 30 accounts, and this goes all the way back to my consulting days,
Yeah.
my argument has always been go sit at those accounts. You will sell more business with your existing accounts than you will by chasing and trying to kiss babies and shake hands,
Right.
right, on new business. I was a lot more effective when I had a client of getting to know that client and doing more with that client than just trying to it is really hard to connect and deliver new accounts. So if you have existing accounts, you have to allocate enough time to really understand. So to your point of like, if I had PepsiCo as an account, I should know when they had their quarterly earnings. I should listen to their quarterly earnings. I should have alerts on my phone that are popping every time something unique happens, an organizational change at a senior level, at a transitional period for the business, whatever it might be, an acquisition, a sale. You should have that. And then for potential new clients, I think you have to approach those a little differently, right? You have to be out there looking at compiling a list of who those potential new clients are. You have to start looking at what do you think those signals are? And then I would say, then you have to start doing the hard work of looking at, okay, well, who are the people within those companies that I'm connected with? I think LinkedIn is a tremendous platform. It's a billion
Agree.
plus people. There's no gatekeepers, right? When people used to try to get to me when I was at Bed Bath, they had to go through my assistant, Jermeen, and she was
Right.
a wall, right?
Right.
She did not let people get to me unless it was appropriate. And so you don't have that in this more digital, remote world that we live in.
Yeah.
You have an ability to go out and connect, but you have to connect with them. You can't let sales be your leading punch, right?
Right.
You have to connect with someone, like we did, and say, let's get to know each other a little bit. Let's connect. And then let's build on that. If you do that, right, it's much easier to sell to people who know you because they've built a level of trust and there's a foundation there than it is for you to lead with, hey, my solution is great and here's why you should listen to me.
Right. Right. So you just a couple more questions and we can wrap up. But you talked about getting out and kind of walking the halls and those sorts of things. I'm curious if you have if you found a challenge over the years, and I'll use an example of like Keurig Dr. Pepper. Hey, want to have a meeting? Can we come out to Frisco and sit down with you? Well, I'm not in Frisco. I'm actually in Burlington, Massachusetts. And the other guy that I'm with is Burlington, Vermont. And then there's one guy in Frisco. So let's just do a Zoom. Um, when you'd really love to get together and kind of get to know them. Have you found that's a struggle too, or are things coming back since people are maybe starting to return to offices more?
Yeah, I think that that's a reality, right? Where people are working remote even still, and if it's not full time, it's still part time. So you're going to have that. But I would maybe adjust the start of your premise there, which is that leading is, hey, I would like to come and meet with you because I want to pitch you something,
Right.
right? And what I would suggest to people is I think they have to start inverting that and saying, what is it about Chris that I need and should know? And how do I connect with him potentially on a personal level before I even am in a position to pitch him? Right? So that if you and I know each other a little bit, it could
Right.
be, hey, you post something on LinkedIn and I comment on it.
Right.
Hey, you posted something about a Jets game or a Giants game or whatever your football team, or you comment that, or you went to a trade show, or hey, I saw you on a podcast, or hey, I noticed that you went to an NRF Retail Insider show that Kathy Hotka puts on. I've known Kathy for a long time. You've got to create that personal connection first. And
Right.
then once you've been able to do that, then I think, hey, Chris, it was really great chatting with you about, the event that you went to. Hey, I work with this company. I think it's a great solution. As I looked at these things that you have going on in your company, I think it might be a worthwhile thing for you to look at. Would you be interested in just doing a quick introductory call on it?
Yeah.
Right now that's changed the dynamic a bit to getting people into mindset. All right, I already know who Rich is. You know, all right, he understands me a little bit. Or we have some level of trust with each other. Yeah, I'd be willing to take a 30-minute discovery
Yeah.
call with him. And I think if people start to change the way they approach it, rather than hey, I want to pitch you something, so you need to allocate time to me. People on the other
Yeah.
side of that, having been on both sides of this coin, when I was on the other side of that coin, I bristled, right? Which is why I put my assistant Jermeen as a wall
Yeah.
in between, and she would be the filter, and she would present the information, but I wouldn't have to then engage on that, because you have to understand too, it's very time consuming to
Yeah.
take all these calls, right? And so if you're trying to run your business, you're trying to deliver results, you're trying to get things done, right? It's very hard to take a random 30 minutes to an hour to just
Yeah.
do an introductory call, right? And if you have that appreciation, then I think you'll value their time more. And if you value their time more, you'll be more respectful of that. And I think that will lead to better results.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you remember it was probably 3 or 4 years ago on LinkedIn that the CIO of Boot Barn showed a video of him scrolling through his emails, and he said, like, every single one of these is some salesperson asking for 15 minutes of my time for a quick chat. And he said something like, if I said yes to all of these, I would never do anything else.
Yep. Listen, I remember and this is going back a long time ago, when I first started, I was CIO at Bed Bath back in '98.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, the volume of pitches that I was getting was so much so that I wasn't able to even respond to some internal notes. And I remember our general counsel, Alan Roush, came down to my office and said, listen, I understand you're getting a lot of emails, but you need to respond same day. That's the culture of our company. Respond. And if you can't answer at least acknowledge it, that, hey, but you can't do that when in that example, like, but you can't do that when you're just getting flooded with sales pitch. And quite frankly, oftentimes from people who haven't put any level of effort into really understanding who I am, what my business is. It's one of the things that when I was at Bed Bath and a vendor would come in and I would give them time and they'd say, oh, I love your stores. I would always ask them, oh, what store do you shop at? What was the last item you bought? Because more often than not, people were BSing. They didn't know the stores. They never bought an item. And that told me a lot about, do you understand my business, right? We're here trying to service our customers. I need partners who understand what I'm trying to accomplish so that you can help me do my job better. And so
Right.
again, getting that mindset of understanding who you're pitching, what you're pitching. And believe me, I fail at it every day. And it's a continual work in progress. It's a continual learning to try to get better at it, but we all fail, and you have to just continue to try to learn from those failures and get better at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, Rich, I know you mentioned you had a call at the top of the hour. We're coming close to about 5 minutes, so I don't want to
Right.
make you run right up against it. So how about you tell the listeners, watchers, how they get a hold of you and all that good stuff?
Sure. First of all, Chris, thanks for having me on today. This was an enjoyable conversation. As you could tell, I love talking about this stuff, and it's a great time to be in the space. I love doing what I'm doing. People can find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest. You can go to my business website, which is CDA Ventures. That's CDAventures.com, or you can go to my website at richardcmcmahon.com, which is really focused more around some press that I do and speaking engagements, et cetera. But, any of those, reach out to me. I'm generally available and like to make time. I like to network and find ways that I can help people. So reach out and let me know.
Yeah, this was great. I hope we could talk again. We had 15 minutes before we even started this. It's been kind of fascinating. It's been fun to connect on this. So
Yes, same here.
hope you have a fantastic day.
All right, Chris, thanks very much. Have a
Bye
great
now.
one.